I notice no one's chanting, yeah, Malcolm. It's pretty much...
You guys know we're here to talk about books, right?
I was trying to think, this is a great thrill, first of all, for me to be here. I think I was trying to figure this out backstage, the third most famous person I've ever met. It's pretty, it's like really good. Number 3.
Wait, you're saying I'm the third most famous person you've ever met?
Mm-hmm. I met Obama once. You're very famous. You're not that level. One? And number 2, I met Oprah once. I think you're 3 behind Obama and Oprah in my book. So, so it's very very exciting. So we're going to discuss your book, which, by the way, is really lovely.
Thank you.
And I say that in all sincerity, not as and I think that's the right word. There's something incredibly heartbreaking and beautiful about it, and that's where I wanted to start. One of the many unexpected pleasures of this book is the picture that you paint of Hollywood in the 70s, and I wanted to start there because it's a Hollywood that doesn't. I may be wrong. Doesn't really exist anymore. Is that right?
It doesn't exist in the slightest. And I actually had written extensively lamenting the loss of that time and just how the city has changed. And I took it out because I kind of got into grumpy old man territory. But I thought it was kind of some of the best writing that I did. And I sort of would like to release a special little grumpy old man book of the stuff that I took out.
Yeah.
Just because it was a love note to a Hollywood of yesteryear that now exists on the tip of a real estate agent's tongue in describing, that this was where Charlie Chaplin kept his woman or something, but Hollywood was obviously, its whole heritage coming up as the beginning of the film industry. But in the 70s, when I got there, it was this place that was so, in one way, very dangerous and predatory and kind of reveling in the free love of the 60s and that being exploited and turned into money and created a really seedy, mean-spirited, dangerous casting couch type of vibe, which was really gross and disgusting. And as a young boy in Hollywood, I was, I dealt with that. And also a young boy who was unwatched and a street kid and wild and out till 5 o'clock in the morning on the Hollywood streets when I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
Came into many a scary encounter, but also it was alive with a wildness. It was like the Wild West, man. It was, there was so much art and so much music, and it was so untamed and feral in its way, and there was so much money. It was just a weird, wild, glam, punk, everything.
You move here from New York, and you're how old at that point?
I was just turned 11 years old in 1972.
And your family, you and your mom and your stepfather and your sister moved first to where? To Koreatown? Am I remembering correctly?
No, we lived in the Miracle Mile district.
Miracle Mile.
Yeah.
And then you moved from there to where exactly?
To Hollywood, to Willoughby and Laurel in Hollywood, yeah.
Yeah. So
little stucco house.
There's I wanted to get into a little bit more. One of the things I remember you talk about when you went to high school, this sort of what is now a curious fact, which would not have been curious to you at all back then, which is in that era, a public high school was still a place where everyone went. So you had friends whose parents were prostitutes and friends whose parents were rich and lived in the
Absolutely. And middle school, too. And when I was in 6th grade. Back then, public school, you just went where you lived. And it had every economic class, every racial class, every ethnicity, everybody together. And I don't know if the standard of education was higher then or not, but it was like private school was much more rare then. I didn't hear about kids going, but I came across every kind of person from, gang members to rich kids who had lived with a wealth unlike anything I had ever encountered, to, kids who were like trading switchblades and bags of weed in 7th grade,
Yeah. It's really the last moment in this city's history where you had that kind of full integration in the public school system. I mean, it's a really odd. I mean, I'm this is a very sort of nerdy sociological point to begin with, but I think ultimately, I wonder whether it's connected to the kind of art that was coming out of the schools at that time. Like you describe, you had a friend, was it Freddie Gold?
Yeah.
Who lives in the fancy house?
Yeah, he was the rich kid
above Sunset.
Yeah.
And like, so in your same friend group, you were living under, I guess, your family had.
We were all right. I mean,
all right.
we actually had a pretty nice little spot. I mean, we were just getting by, but we did fine. It wasn't like we were.
But someone of your economic background today does not have a school friend named Freddie Gold who lives in that kind of. Yeah.
No, now if you're rich, you're going to a private school, and it really speaks to where we're at now, like the divisiveness and the haves and have-nots, and this gulf becoming wider, and the have-nots being this entire new strata of society that is living on the street and sleeping in their own shit, you know. Mm-hmm. And being in Los Angeles, it's so prevalent and so intense. It's difficult to understand. It you know, back then, when I walked around the streets of Hollywood in the 70s, when you saw a homeless person, it was like, oh, there's a bum. There's a guy eating out of a trash can. That was a rare thing. And now it's just a huge segment of society, and it's, part of the divisiveness of the country that we live in.
So tell us the touch points of your adolescent world in Hollywood. So you would go, where were you playing basketball? Where were you, when your 13 or 14-year-old self, tell me all your hangouts.
13, 14, I was hanging out at Laurel Elementary School. I was hanging out at Carthay Elementary School. I was hanging out at West Hollywood Park, shooting hoops. I was hanging out around Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset and stuff, because there were just so many little hustles that I had with my friends to get money. Me and my friend JD used to sit up on Hollywood Boulevard with kazoos and trash can lids and do songs, play songs to get money. It was all about the hustle when I was a kid, because from a very young age, it wasn't that I was ever a homeless kid or anything like that, but I was completely unwatched, and I was a street kid. I got, from that age, home was just a place to crash. Sometimes I came home, sometimes I didn't, and I just got into everything that I could. But there were so many little hangouts, that we found. Found older people that would get us high, so we'd go over to their house, anywhere.
Where one of the things, the first half of the book is about your childhood, and although you talk a lot about your stepfather, that point you just said about how you were unwatched is the striking, to a 2019 ear.
Yeah.
The striking fact is, where in God's name are his parents? But none of your friends seem to have. Is that fair?
I think I met kids that fit into, my social plan, other kids that had that sort of freedom as well, to varying degrees. And for my parents, my stepdad, who was the main father figure around, was in and out of substance abuse and just wasn't paying attention. My mom had her own, relationship problems. They were just too involved in their own pain and their own difficulties and their own struggle to navigate their way through life to watch me, And I know that they loved me, but they just didn't have the skills or the tools to translate that love into being present and paying attention.
Yeah. Did your sister take care of you?
No, she was wild. We were both wild, me and my sister, Yeah, no.
Because
No, bless your heart.
Because the kind of fascinating paradox about the book is, as you describe your childhood, you're describing chaos and mayhem on the one hand, and yet at the same time, you seem to have had an extraordinary amount of joy as a child.
Yeah, I did. It's funny, I've always in general had a thing inside of me that yearned so much to connect and to love and to find things to believe in. Like when I was a kid, I loved literature. When I discovered music, it changed my life. I loved music. But the fact that I was unwatched and the fact that I was a wild street kid, even though it made growing up very difficult because I didn't have the structure and I didn't have, my parents guiding me into growing up and becoming a man, that that transition from being a kid. But by that token, I had freedom, and it got me into a lot of trouble. I was a thief. I was a drug user. I was out of control. I had to make huge mistakes to learn. I had to, and a lot of the book is my search for my moral compass, but as well, I looked for my family in the street. I looked for my family with my friends, and when I connected with my friends, it was profound, and it was where I found, extreme love and connection. The unhealthy part about it was I looked to my friends to fulfill roles that parents are supposed to fulfill. And, 14-year-old boys you're getting high with can't do that, So that was difficult for me and kind of left me in a raw and vulnerable, uncomfortable position many a time. But at the same time, it's, no accident that someone like me and the friends that I made as a kid ended up starting a band that was able to connect with people. Because any connection that any musician ever has with anyone is in equal proportion to the connection that they can have with one another when they're playing together. Or that if they're a solo person, the connection that they have with the divine voice of music, it's equal. And oftentimes, people talk about talent, well, you've got talent because you can do this. It's like, I don't know. You know what I mean? And sometimes I think, in music, the best talent is no talent, because you might not have a natural feeling for rhythm or harmonic progression or whatever, but because you don't have it, you come at it from your own way, and you invent something, that is really unique. And yeah.
I want to come back to that, but I just wanted to dwell for a moment on this paradoxical happiness. And there's a passage in your book, and I'm going to make you read a little bit of it, but you're describing November 21st, 1978. So how old are you in 1978?
Is this the day that I'm happy? The happy day?
The happy day.
Yeah, well, I think I'm 14.
Yeah, you're like
Yeah, and I had described so many sad situations.
Yeah.
And I only put things in the book that shaped me. I had many a wild tale that probably would have been the most exciting stories for people to read, and probably would have been the headlines and anything writing anybody about the book, any article about the book. But it was important to me to not write things for entertainment values, but just to be honest to things that actually changed me and opened me up. So amidst all these traumatic things and melancholy things, I was like, you know what? I had beautiful days too. So I think that's what
this is this beautiful day. You describe, you walk a mile to school, bouncing your basketball. And I love this little thing about the peace sign I drew on my ball popping up between potholes and sloping sidewalks. By the way, there's so much lovely language in this book. But anyway, you get to, I'm going to have you read, I'm just to set up this little part I want you to read. So you get to class, and you play basketball before school. Then you sit in social studies class, and you deliver an oral report on the composer Hector Berlioz.
Symphonie Fantastique.
You get an A+. You eat pizza. You flirt with a girl that you have a crush on. And then just start reading by shot after school. Just read that last little bit. Shot more.
Okay.
Shot more hoops.
Okay. I shot more hoops. Oh yeah. Shot more hoops after school. My shot was so on. Then ran home. The house all to myself. Practiced trumpet out of my Arbin book, the trumpeter's Bible. The classical melodies resonating through my cranium and echoing around my bedroom. Then cooked myself a delicious spaghetti dinner. Lay on my bed, satiated and content, reading Richard Bach's Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Watched the Laker game, happy and cozy, before falling into a deep and restorative sleep.
So it's like, but it's to my point, this is this description of this perfect day as a 14-year-old, and there's no mention of any adult.
Yeah, well,
right? It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah,
right?
well, it's true.
And it's about, and also it's about you seeking out and finding things that bring you pleasure. Like the book you read, the game you watched, the the music presentation you give, the basketball you take with you to school, you had to sort of create this environment for yourself. I thought it was sort of such a striking contrast to the life of a contemporary 14-year-old.
Yeah, I guess for me, as a kid, and really writing about this book, like, I learned a lot about myself. And I wrote a lot of things I wrote about. I was like, holy shit, why didn't anybody talk to me about this stuff? Like earlier on when my parents split up, when I was a kid, my father worked for the Australian government, and he wore a suit, had a briefcase, went to work every day. We had dinner at 7:00 at night. He played golf on the weekends. He ran a very tight ship. It was structured. It was almost like militantly so. And we came from Australia to America because my father got an assignment in New York at the Australian consulate. We were supposed to be in New York for 4 years, then go back to Australia and continue on in our very normal, proper life. But my mom, my wild-ass mom, in all her heart-following wildness, left my dad, took up with a junkie jazz musician who lived in his parents' basement. And, my dad went back without us. He left, and we moved in with this new man who's a drug addict who lived in his parents' basement. And that's when everything just went crazy. And when I look at that in particular, and I'd never really, I knew all this stuff that happened, but I had never really, looked at it with any real degree of objectivity. And when I wrote about it, it was very emotional for me to look at it. And kind of that was one of the times I was like, geez, mom, dad, stepdad, you never, ever sat down and talked to us about it. And when I first kind of realized that, I had a tanty for a minute. I was fucking angry. And then as time went by, I realized they did the best they knew. They just didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
But just to your question and your comment, I was really lucky as a kid to fall in love with books. And the time that I had with any book, and since I was a little boy, and even when I was the wildest, out of control, drug shooting, freak out, criminal ass motherfucker, I read every day, unless I was too high to do it, and even then I would probably make some, bumbling attempt. But I got so much joy and felt so much hope and saw that there was a life, even if it was a fantasy life, it was something that was beautiful. And the same thing with music. It opened up these doors and these feelings of this limitless possibility that was so beautiful and beyond anything that I understood in a world that often seemed, hypocritical and cruel, that I did have that. I created those things for myself. But you're the first person to mention on that beautiful day that there's no parents around, and I never thought of that. Yeah. But I realized that outside of with my friends and the love that I got from sports, playing basketball in particular, and the thing that I loved about it was the unspoken connection. That sort of telepathic thing you have with people. And the same thing playing music. And the same thing kind of with a writer when you're reading their book. You're connecting in this way. Mm-hmm. And the magic of my solitude with those things that gave me hope are really, that's me. Those are the pillars of the best of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the parental theme as well, what's interesting is that this book is full of kind of pathology and loss and dysfunction, but it's almost all adult. So you have, am I counting correctly? 3 pedophiles, 3 adult suicides. It's like you're surrounded by all of these deeply screwed up adult figures who are making your life incredibly difficult and sad and complicated. And the simple and beautiful pleasures seem to be the ones that are kind of peer pleasures, as opposed to, that's the kind of...
Right. Well, I guess for me, simple and beautiful, is also profound and complex and layered and infinite. But in terms of the adults, there are 3 pedophiles in there?
There's the guy you look up later. He turns out to be a pedophile.
Oh, yeah.
There's the guy who lies down next to you when you go over to his house, and you miraculously escape. And then there's another pedophile. I was keeping track, but after a while, there's a lot of it. This is like Hollywood in the 70s.
Scary stuff, man. But
it is.
When writing about it, there's different things I've had in life, I'm glad I never became a junkie. And when I did shoot up drugs like a moron, I'm glad that I never OD'd and died or, got a deadly disease. And I feel like there's there's some protective angel looking out for me, because also growing up with, I put myself in situations a million times growing up in Hollywood as a little kid where I could have really been hurt.
Like this, will you tell that crazy story about the swimming pool that you guys would jump?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I would have thought it was burned.
Yeah, that was just the thing.
You were like, you struggled to find out which of the crazy swimming school stories I was referring to.
Yeah.
This is the one.
No, because there's two swimming stories. One is like
sure
late
there's
at
more
night
than
when we would go sneak into pools of apartment buildings to swim.
I'm talking about when we
jumped off the roofs, yeah. Well, that was, Anthony and I, as, when we met when we were 15, it was very explosive. We met and it was antagonistic right from the first second, and also literally from the first second, I looked at him and I knew that this was a person I'd be hanging out with for the rest of my life, and there was no doubt. I knew, and it was intense. And, my mom said to me, my mom's passed away, but I remember her telling me, kind of towards her later years, she's like, Michael, I remember, when you came home when you were 15 and you walked in and you were alit, you were glowing with something that I hadn't seen in you before. And you said, Mom, I finally found someone I can talk to. And that was the day that I met Anthony. And I remember that week, it was raining. And so for PE class, we had to sit up we just to sit and talk. You could go down, but you sat in the gym, and we just sat and we just started talking. And it was just, this nonstop river of communication.
Was that the first time you ever met him?
Yeah.
So it was just a kind of random encounter in gym
It was
class.
just I had this kid, Tony Scher, in a headlock. And it's so funny because Tony Scher could beat the hell out of me. But he was my best friend at the time. And I had come out of hanging out with these kids that were real, bad kids. I mean, relatively bad in terms of every day was just what crime can we do, to these kids that were good kids. They did their homework. We played sports in the street. We might have smoked a little weed here and there, but and I had this kid in a headlock, and I was giving him a noogie. I don't know if you're familiar with a noogie, but it's when you get someone in a headlock and you grind your knuckles in. And Anthony came up and he's lay off him, and I was scared of him, and he looked unlike in 1976, 77 in my 10th grade. Every kid had long hair or a big afro and puka shells and OP shorts and Led Zepp. And he had a crew cut, and he just looked different. He had tight pants and and muscle. He was buff, and and he was intense. He was lay off him. And, whoa, and I just felt this, this feeling of that we both were apart from everything, and that we would see things in a way that was different.
Yeah.
And I was right.
It's when you describe the moment you meet Anthony in this book, you realize the book is a love story, right? It's this extraordinary romantic, in the most beautiful sense of that word, encounter. And and what's amazing to me is you say you came home that night and you realized that this was your soulmate from the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah. I just knew that we'd be, I don't know what the right word for it is. And one of the things, and perhaps it's hard for me to have an objective view on it because our friendship is still this moving, fluctuating, intense thing, that it's difficult for me to understand. And I tried to understand it as best I could because it was such a big part of my childhood, such a big part of my growing up. And but as I write in the book, it was difficult. It's difficult for me to understand because it's not like other things where people fulfill something for you in life. You know what I mean? If it's a romantic relationship, it's an intellectual relationship, it's someone you might share a spiritual path with, it's all these different things. But with he and I, it was from the beginning, this electric motivation. And at the same time, it's sort of like north and south magnets, how they have to be together, they have to exist together, but they push against each other too. And I wrote about it, like, I write this piece about these what do you call those bighorn sheep, like ramming heads together, and how they fight. And it might not, it's just because that's what they do. It feels good to smash their heads into each other, and they're alive and they're electric and everything is flowing through them. And even though, like with Anthony and I, we butt heads all the time and we have completely different worldviews and, different ways of going about life, but,
You know what?
brothers.
It reminded me of, there's a very famous marriage researcher called John Gottman who does this exercise with couples. And what he does is he asks them to describe the very first time they met. And his theory is that in the very first encounter between two people are the seeds of their future relationship. And he gave these hilarious examples like, the couple will be in some kind of therapy because the guy is like cold and unresponsive. And he'll say, well, what happened in the first time you met? He goes, well, he was 25 minutes late for the date. He'd forgotten his wallet. He was distracted by the baseball game going, it's like it's all there. So it made me think, when you're goofing around and then in comes this kind of like dynamic, charismatic, like weird dude who's not out of step with everything that's going around. And instantly there's a kind of, but there's conflict from the beginning.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Get away
That's a
from
really
that.
interesting way to look at it. I just got married a few weeks ago, as I was saying, and of course thank you. But of course, when you're saying that, I'm just thinking like the first time I saw this woman, it was just like, will you marry me? You know what I mean? Just like, and I hadn't said a word.
Yeah.
But that type of it's fascinating.
Yeah.
When we come back, Malcolm and Flea continue discussing Flea's relationship with the Red Hot Chili Peppers' Anthony Kiedis.
Broken Record is presented by Lexus, which asks, what amazing ideas will you inspire next?
We're back with Malcolm and Flea live from the Palace Theater in Los Angeles.
Talk a little bit more about your relationship at that moment in that early stage with Anthony. So you have this kind of electric, complex connection. What happens the next day?
We just start, because this came, the beginning of this conversation was we used to go around in Hollywood, and most apartment buildings have swimming pools. So we'd go, any apartment that had a building that had a swimming pool, we'd try to get up on the roof to jump into the pool. And, we'd like ditch our clothes, run in, oftentimes naked, get up on top of a pool and just come flying out of the sky. And, land in this pool, and sometimes people would be sunning themselves by the pool. And here come these crazy kids, like literally flying out of the sky, screaming and yelling and landing in their pool naked. People just, and it was just like the thrill, like everything about it. The freaking out of the people, the wild flying through the sky, the running out of there, the being in trouble, the mixing up, this chaos happening, the thriving on the chaos of the moment. And
Would you have
that's
done
basically like emblematic of everything that we did. Like it was just like every day, like what can we do that will be wild? And
would you have ever done those things without him? Did you need him to do that?
I think I needed him to take it to that level because I found a like-minded person. And it's funny because when my mom told me that I found someone I could talk to, Anthony's mom once told me, Anthony told me he found someone who will do anything. So maybe, for both of us, we just kind of fed on each other, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you keep a journal in those years?
I never did. No, the crazy thing, when I started writing this book, I wrote it pretty much all by hand in a journal and, just kept filling up journals. And I realized that I've only ever written in journals when I'm absolutely miserable. Like when I'm going through like a lot of like anxiety, panic attacks, deep sadness, just being in horror of being in my own skin, when I'll write to try to understand what I'm going through.
Yeah.
But in writing, and I just during the writing process of this book, I learned beyond just trying to understand my life and make sense of it, one of the big things I learned is I love writing. I just fucking love it. Like just the way the words sit next to you on the page, like the color of the way different words look next to each other. I learned what alliteration means, like I just, every time I sat down and wrote, when I lifted my head up afterwards, I felt connected and engaged to a part of myself that I had never really activated before.
Yeah.
And it was such a beautiful thing. And I forgot what I was coming around to. God, it was going to be great.
Well, no, I was going to say, I thought you must have, because your memory for all this detail is astonishing.
Well, one of the things that made me end the book when the Chili Peppers started is when I started writing about my childhood. I think I don't have that great of a memory, I mean, it comes and goes. But once I started writing about something, I always wrote from a place of feeling. Like it would be one little thing about an event that I remembered, but I knew it was something I've been carrying around my whole life, and was one of those things that guides me without me even knowing that it guides me. It's like something like, oh, I'm scared, I don't know why, or I'm anxious. And because something triggers something from my childhood, but it's a murky memory. It's just like a color or a shape in the distance. And so I'd start from feeling, like, how did I feel? And when I came from that place of like physical sensation, and I started writing, it's like it would become clear. It would the clarity and the thing would come into focus. And then not only did the event itself and the narrative of the event come into focus, but then I would start digging underneath, like what was the thing underneath that made it so, and why is it such an important thing to me? Yeah. And that was I loved that. I loved learning that.
But it's not like Keith Richards, who had to hire a team of researchers to write his autobiography.
What did he do?
He literally had a team of researchers.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
To reconstruct his own memory.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, that's like an extreme way to go in the way that I really did not want to go, because it was important to me. And I think that I got my facts really straight in this book. I'm sure that I missed some things here and there, but I didn't care about that in the slightest. Like I thought, even if something happened, and I have it completely wrong in my head, like the story, I've twisted it somehow through some neuroses or whatever, that this is the story that I'm carrying. And all my life, I'm basing my actions and my thoughts and my relationship to the world based on this story that I'm holding. And if I learned that I had it wrong, that would be fascinating. That'd be great. And that would be could be a watershed moment for me in that, learning from my mistake. But I felt like the way that something lives in my heart is of equal validity, or even a dream is of equal validity to any like actual factual thing that happened.
Yeah. When you met Anthony, your relationship at first was, how much was it about music? Was the music a part of what you were sharing in those early years, or?
Yeah, it was part of it, but I mean, from a young age, we started like going out and sneaking into clubs and getting into places and seeing bands played. And I was seeing rock music for the first time because as a kid, I didn't like rock music. I thought it was dumb music. I thought it was music for people who didn't care about music, because I grew up in a jazz household, and jazz being this like really sophisticated, cerebrally, emotionally, spiritually, I just saw rock music as something for kids who care about haircuts and silly magazines and stuff. And all of a sudden now it's taking on a different meaning, because I meet Anthony and then more profoundly with Hillel later, but we start sneaking in, and I start seeing rock music. And even though I still want to be Dizzy Gillespie when I grow up, I want to be a jazz trumpet player, I start feeling this visceral feeling about things. And I'm a kid, I'm starting to come into my sexuality, I'm starting to come in, and I'm getting this, I'm out in Hollywood clubs as a little kid, and I'm seeing all this crazy behavior and, nudity and people making out and doing weird things in nightclubs where little kids don't belong.
I don't get the sense in reading your book that you and Anthony ever paid admission to any club.
No. No, we like to sneak in.
I feel like
things.
Challenging you to produce a single ticket from any concert.
Yeah, no, we used to have this thing, like it probably still works. If you want to get into a movie theater, walk in backwards. We used to do this thing, just walk in backwards. It works all the time. Yeah.
There's a. Do you- How would, if Anthony was sitting here
Yeah.
on this side of me,
Yeah.
how would he respond to your account of your meeting?
I'm sure it was, very different for him. I know that with Anthony and I, if we, we're together in a room and we both experience the same thing, we'll walk out and we'll both have different stories to tell. So
How do your stories differ?
they just do. They're just, we're both very intense about who we are. And I don't think I can really put a qualitative sameness on how they differ because it varies from situation to situation.
Yeah.
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 But, I feel like I'm talking about all these differences because, he's someone that I love deeply and we're brothers and we love each other. And sometimes I worry that in me trying to understand it, that I wrote about in my book, and it is a love story of my book. Even though there are many love stories in my book, and my story is a story of love, of yearning for it and being distracted and going wrong ways and all of that. But with us, no matter what, love has always been enough. Yeah.
The other great love story of the book is about Hillel Slovak.
Yeah.
Tell us about your first encounter with him.
Well, I remember the first time I really noticed him because we were, it had been in school together since 7th grade, but I guess it was the last year of junior high in 9th grade, 8th or 9th, and for the school talent show, he and a few of his friends dressed up like Kiss for the talent show and came out the talent show and lip-synced to Kiss. And they had it down. It wasn't like they just put on a mask. Like they had spent days. They had, the makeup, the high boots. Every outfit had been sewed and studded, and the belts. And they really looked like otherworldly Kiss guys. And I didn't even know what Kiss was. It was, I didn't know about this stuff. But I remember seeing him mime in a talent show with Jack Irons, who was, the other founding member of the Chili Peppers. And just being amazed, I was like at their commitment and their intensity and their belief in this thing that was like a cartoon to me. It was just like some silly, thing. But I was like, wow, they really believe in this. Like their commitment, their kicks and their moves and their back to back, like rocking out, wheedle, look at each other, tongues out. Like I was really like impressed in a way that I had never been impressed by even like, real virtuosos in rock music. And so I noticed him then, and then there was one day, and I, recount this story in my book, where Anthony and I were out, like, stoned as usual, riding the bumper cars in North Hollywood, and we were always hitchhiking, always trying to get a ride, and always had a hustle, and we were walking down the street, and we saw him drive by. I guess we were just turned 16. We were old enough to drive, and he had a green Datsun 510, and he was blasting La Via Strangiata by Rush and rocking out. And we saw him, and we're like, we know that dude. He's in my social studies class. And we ran and chased him down, and, because we wanted a ride, and he gave us a ride. And right away, just like when Anthony and I connected, we became a threesome.
Yeah.
And it became every day.
By the way, to my point, you remember that it was a Datsun 510.
Yeah, well, he was, it was a fantastic car and a banging stereo in it. Yeah.
It's like Rick Rubin on the episode of Broken Record that just aired. He was interviewing Tanya Tucker, and she's remembering these touring in the early 70s when she was, 14 years old.
Yeah.
And the same thing. She's describing everything, and she's like, yeah, and then we had like, 2 brown Ford LTDs that we were, it's like,
Yeah.
Who remembers that particular model of the, 1971 Ford?
Well, when you're a 16-year-old boy in Los Angeles, a car is a very significant thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said a Datsun 510 was very significant.
Yeah.
But,
oh, no, I remember it well because, he had a car. We were in it constantly.
Describe 16-year-old Hillel Slovak.
I fell in love with Hillel. He was just an absolutely beautiful boy. He had long curly hair, and He was an artist. He painted these beautiful paintings, and he had an interesting like penmanship, the way he would write, and he would get into drawing things. Like he'd go through a phase of just drawing cows and he would draw these beautiful cows with these pastoral landscapes, and he was just an artist. I'd never met a kid like this before. He was sensitive and poetic and artistic, and he loved rock music. And he had this red Messenger guitar that he slung over his shoulder, and it just looked so sexy and cool the way he held it. And like I said, I had never liked rock music. But when I met Hillel, I fell in love with rock music because I fell in love with him. And we'd sit in his room, and he just played me all this great rock music, like Hendrix. Like I had missed out on Hendrix, it was already 1977, and I didn't know about Hendrix yet. I knew he existed, I knew the songs, but all of a sudden, like this sound, this virtuosity, this power, this thing is just filling me up, and it's changing my life, and his belief in it, and his dreams, and his like yearning to connect and to this music to like breathe through him as a vehicle for his life was so intense. And we just sit and listen and look at art books, and it just changed everything for me. It was really beautiful. And when I wrote about Hillel in this book, it was important to me. I really just wanted to write about my childhood and to write about how I felt then, and to be in my head as how I was when I was a kid, because I thought that like the value and the honesty of the story would be not like coming from an adult point of view, but how I was then, like how I was trying to make sense of things. But I couldn't think about it. He died in 1988, and his life and death are so intertwined to me at this point. It was difficult for me to write about him without writing about his death, so I did write about it. And because he's become for me in a way like I have all these beautiful stories and memories and this from him, and he's really tragic. It's like you talk about the book being sad and beautiful at the same time, and that's how my memories are for him. It's like all these beautiful things, and then this tremendous sense of loss and sadness of his death at such a young age, and so I wrote about that too, and because he exists for me now in my dreams and in my thoughts and every day.
Throughout the book, you have these little moments when you, which work really beautifully, where you, in italics, you kind of give us either flashbacks or you jump into the future or asides. And you have one about his funeral that is one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever read. Do you want to talk a little bit about?
I wrote that. It's been like, the book was going to come out last year, and I decided to wait a year just because I was going through some stuff. But so I don't remember exactly what I wrote. I haven't looked at it in a while.
Yeah.
I know I wrote two pieces.
Yeah,
one
two.
like the day that he dies. Oh, that.
No. Then there's another one.
There's
earlier.
another part. Yeah. Well, Hillel died from a heroin overdose, and we were just kids. We were 26, but I was 26 going on 15, and for a long time, I've really kind of, I'm way better at it now, but kind of beat myself up because I didn't know how to be there for him then. I was angry because I was like, we have this thing going, man. We got this band. This is cool. We the funk. We got to like find our rhythm. And he and I, he had asked me to start playing bass. We had this real profound connection, and we had this music that we thought was unique, and we were propelling it forward. And when he got strung out on heroin, I felt abandoned. I felt left. I felt like he was leaving me, and I got angry at him. And so the way that I expressed my concern for his, drug problem was to be angry, and I got mad at him, and I judged, and I came from a place of, come on, get it together, we got to do this. And it causes me great difficulty to now know, like, from my knowing now and having obviously dealt with many a friend and many a person in my life with substance abuse problems, like, had I been able to be there, that maybe I could have helped a lot. That maybe I could have saved him. Maybe I could have helped him to, capture the beautiful light of who he was and to shed all these, deadly distractions from his life. But I didn't know that then. And even though I know it's, not my fault, a lot of that, I guess that part that I was writing was driven by me coming to terms with that, with my inability to help him. And, and just the feelings of loss. And, I often, for a long time, I had a recurring dream where he would come in my dream, and he would just be kind of upset, that I wasn't there for him in that way. And, so I guess it's just me working through that and understanding it.
Yeah. You talk about he was the one who introduced you to the bass.
Yeah.
So he had a band, he had Anthem. That was his band in high school.
Anthem with a Y.
With a Y.
Yeah.
And what kind of music did they play?
It was rock music yearning to be prog rock. It's the best way I can describe it. It was, it started off like before I joined the band, they were doing a lot of covers, Zeppelin and Queen and stuff like that, and writing their own songs, which are kind of in that like hard rock vein, like mid-70s classic rock, I guess is what you call it now. But it started to become more progressive and more arty and more crazy, weird chord progressions and quirky, clever kind of things. And yeah, it was like that. Yeah.
So did you like the music of Anthem before you? Did Anthem come after you became friends with Hillel?
Yeah, it did.
Oh, after.
It did. So I didn't really know about it before.
Yeah.
But when I first, all my judgments about rock music started going away when I went over to Jack's house in his bedroom where they would rehearse. And I'd see them playing, and I had always played music in an academic setting. I played in the LA Junior Philharmonic. I played in whatever. I played in the LACC Jazz Band when I was in high school. I wanted to be a trumpet player, but it was always a teacher and a conductor and a stand with music on it. And I'm watching them play music just by themselves with no parents and rocking out and rock posters on the walls and girls who were cool at school would come and watch. And I was like, wow, this is a whole nother world. And I started really softening to it and kind of, opening my heart to the idea of it.
So he comes to you and he asks you whether you'll play the bass for the band?
Yeah, and it's a night that I remember so vividly. It was another night where it was raining, and we're sitting in his Datsun 510 in front of his mom's house. And it was raining, and we were listening to this DJ we really loved named Jim Ladd. And he was good. And it was raining, and he started playing Riders on the Storm by The Doors. And we were laying back, I'm sure we were stoned, and we were sitting back and it was playing, and he's like, Mike, he goes, he had a bass player named Todd at the time, and he goes, I think, Todd, he doesn't really believe in it. It's like a hobby for him. He doesn't live it, he doesn't breathe it, and maybe you could learn to play bass, and why don't you learn to play bass and join the band? And I just started fucking shivering all over. And in that moment, I felt so I don't know if honored is even the word, seen and loved and valued, because I knew it meant everything to him. That a band is a fucking sacred thing, and when he when he asked me to join, it was the most loving thing that anyone had ever said to me in my life. It was so great, and sorry, I get emotional, but I was just fucking stoked. And the next day I ran out and got a bass and, got a bass and right away just started whacking away at it. And 2 weeks later I was on stage at Gazzari's in Hollywood playing a gig. And that, became what I did for the rest of my life.
Can you,
When we come back, Flea picks up his bass and walks us through the evolution of his playing style.
Broken Record is presented by Lexus, which asks, what amazing ideas will you inspire next?
We're back with more of Malcolm's interview with Flea.
You have your bass sitting there very tantalizingly. I'd love for you to give us a little guided tour in the kind of evolution of you play the bass in a very distinctive way. I would love for you to explain to us, how did that come about? Walk us through the steps.
Okay. Well, playing trumpet, like I said, had been a very academic, institutional way of learning. And as soon as I started playing bass, all of that went out the window. And not that I wasn't that harmonically sophisticated or anything, but when the first day I got my bass, I had one lesson from Hillel, because I started going like this. And he goes, it's good when you walk with your fingers, just like you're walking. So I started going. And I remember the first thing I ever learned to play was a song that Hillel had written called One Way Woman. Hey there, baby, have you heard the news? He used to sing it. And
Wait, keep going.
I can't remember. And I am a fucking awful singer, and Hillel was worse than me.
I'll chime
and
in.
He sang it. But it went. Hey there, baby, have you heard the news? And I can't remember it. I'm making I don't mean to make a mockery of it, because believe me, when I got on stage at the Gazzari's, I played that thing with every fucking atom that I had invested in it. And so I just started playing, but then the way that I really learned to play, and then I started figuring out, remember one of the first things I learned, Kashmir by Led Zeppelin, I just started playing and learning things. But the way that I really learned was we would get in a room and we would just start improvising. And no plan, no song, we just improvised. And I just started making up rhythms, And even at first they'd be very simple, because I didn't know rock music at all, and I came from wanting to be a jazz trumpet player. I didn't approach the bass in the normal way. So most rock bass lines would, and I didn't know that at all. So right away I was like, and I'd be like, look at that, it goes do wee 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 wee. You know what I mean? I just was nutty, and I just started, growing as a bass player, and it wasn't really, and I just kept doing that, and following, as my friend Ian Mackay says, follow the thread. So say you write something you're like, just that, right? And then he's like, okay, so that's good. What's the next part? And just following the thread and finding the next thing, and I just kept doing it and developing my style. I didn't really have the normal ramp up, because I just right into playing gigs and jamming and stuff. There's a part, I was listening to rock music, and I didn't really even learn other people's songs, which is kind of a weird way too, because most people learn songs, and I still don't do that much. But when I just started playing, and it was 11th grade. And then I saw a kid named Ray. Like, there was Anthem, was a band in high school, and there was another band that was a funk band called Star. And they had a bass player named Ray. And I'd only see bass played like this with the fingers, you know. And Ray was going like this with his thumb. And I was like, what the fuck? Ray. You know, and he was like bouncing and popping and plucking and thumping. And I watched him, and he was like, yeah, man, you know, you hit it with your thumb, slide it down. And that, you know, blew my mind when I saw Ray do that. And then so I started doing that. I started, you know, playing funk and slapping. And then, but then what happened, like a big change for me, was at a certain point I discovered punk rock. And when I started liking rock music, I liked the virtuoso players. I liked Hendrix, and I liked prog rock, like Alan Holdsworth and Bill Bruford and Yes, and these guys that were very proficient, technically accomplished virtuoso players. And I saw, like, I'd seen punk rock shows, and it was wild, and I appreciated, like, the intensity of it, but I was like, they don't know how to play. I didn't like it. And then one night I took acid. And by the way, my book's called Acid for the Children, but I do not recommend children taking acid. That's not the point of it. And we could talk about that if we want. But I saw this band called Fear playing, and they're playing this really fast, hardcore punk rock. And I was just, you know, granted I was on LSD, but I was entranced. You know, I was absolutely entranced, and the movement of it. They actually, you know, were actually really good players within the context of this really fast, relentless, hardcore punk rock. And when I saw them play, it's like opened a door. You know, I might have been on acid, so the door was there to be opened, but the thing was there for real, you know. And, you know, so I'm blown away by this band. Afterwards, I'm telling everyone about it. Oh my God, this band Fear, they're so crazy, and the singer's so charismatic, and the music, and the crazy time signatures. And then 3 days later, I see an ad in the paper: Fear fires bass player, looking for a new bass player. And I call up, I go down and audition, and I was like, you know, I'm the wildest man that ever lived. And I love this music. Like, there's no way they're not going to hire me. And they did hire me. And so then I started playing in Fear, and the music was really fast. Like it was punk rock, very simple, but fast. And also, like, here's a Fear song. It's called Give Me Some Action. It goes... Give me some action, give me some action, give me some action. Anyways. But when I coupled that feeling of punk rock, because when I fell in love with punk rock, I had a real awakening. The real, like, even though I played in Fear and I loved being in Fear and it was exciting and thrilling, the thing that got me was the Germs. I heard, I'd heard the Germs once. I was like, what's that? And the person I was with was like, oh, the Germs, they didn't know how to play. They're obnoxious. The singer was a creep, you know. That's what someone told me at the time. And I was like, yeah, but, and I was getting in my head, they were saying it, and it was someone I admired. But in my head, I was like, that I got to hear that. And I remember the next day I went out and got their record GI. And when I heard it, I remember, like, and it's another thing I write about it in my book. It's a very vivid memory because it changed a part of me forever, which was that when I heard it, it had this magical, spiritual, intangible quality to it that just affected me, that made me tingle all over, that made me get lost in the ether. And here's this like really violent, like relentlessly intense music with no melody and the singer's snarling and yelling. There's, you know, it's not like he's even singing. But it just like, it just took me away. It took me into the ether. And I was so moved by it that it changed the way I looked at music forever. It made me feel that it didn't matter if you knew how to play fast, if you're a virtuoso. And even though I still, you know, love the discipline and all the work ethic that it takes for someone to become a virtuoso, I realized that the motivation and the integrity and the intensity of the message that someone wants to communicate, their vehicle might be something really remedial. And the love of the connection of the people in the band and all these things that make music sacred can exist as vibrantly in the most simple thing as they can in like the greatest John Coltrane solo. So the Germs did that for me. And that's so anyways, when I really fell in love with punk rock, then I took the energy of, you know, punk rock and funk, and I started putting them together, you know, and I started developing a style of my own, even though I did have my own voice as a bass player, but I kind of... started playing these bass lines. These like fast funk bass lines with punk rock energy from those two different styles, and, you know, created this new kind of hybrid of a sound. And also, you know, influenced by a lot of the great kind of post-punk bands, I guess you call it, like from New York. I really loved Defunct with Joe Bowie and James Chance, the Contortions, this kind of that No New York sound and stuff, as well as just the reckless freedom of the great free jazzers when they played punk, like the, you know, lots of people.
When you say that the moment you sort of fuse those two traditions in your own playing, when is that happening? Is that early Chili Peppers or is that pre-Chili Peppers?
Just before the Chili Peppers, you know, just before I started. Yeah, maybe 6 months before. So, and at that time, things were moving so quickly, you know. I guess it's like maybe that happens when you get older, time goes faster, but events, significant events, I think maybe that's like an archetypal thing or a developmental thing with people, I don't know, but happen at that age. And if you're willing to have the diligence to deal with them and integrate them into your life, they can be really profound.
What were your musical peers? How were they responding to that style of playing? Were you getting?
I was doing it by myself at first because I was playing. You know, I left Anthem, which had become What Is This? I joined Fear, and Fear was, you know, punk rock. They didn't want to hear about me slapping and playing funk, you know. But when I got together and started playing with Hillel and Jack again and Anthony, and we started with Chili Peppers, it just all of a sudden just happened. Like I had this stuff, I had this way of playing, and all of a sudden I was like this, and you know, everyone knew what to do, you know, as well as everyone else was. It wasn't just me; everyone was finding their place. And sometimes things, it's just like a zeitgeist, you know, it's like something's in the air, and you express it. It's funny, the more I learn about music, and when I went and studied music, even like, you know, because I never studied music really academically, I mean like kid public school stuff, but when I was 46, I went to college for a year to USC and studied music academically, which I'd never done. And it became so apparent to me that, so you start getting into, say, Bach, which is, you know, very like mathematically complex, but it's all these things are just there. It's like, you know, it's things that resonate at various speeds, and you figure them out, how to put them together to make these mathematical equations that form this sound, and it just becomes like breathing because you're so good at it. It's just all there. You know what I mean? And it's like if our antennae are tuned, we pick it up. And I just think at that time it was there.
Did talk a little bit about, you mentioned the beginnings of the Chili Peppers. Talk a little bit about Anthony's decision. So he goes from someone who's an avid fan of music to deciding that he wants to make music.
Oh, well, you asked earlier if we had, if our relationship was musical from the beginning. And we appreciated music together for sure. You know, we would listen to music all the time, and he would play stuff like I'm in his house where he lived with his dad, and they would play me music that I'd never heard, like Blondie's first album I remember hearing, and just, you know, stuff that I didn't know about because we didn't listen to rock music in my house. And, but Anthony was an actor. You know, had done film parts, and he wanted to be an actor, and he was, you know, gearing himself towards a life as an actor. And, you know, but we were just so wild and crazy and distracted and running around on the street that neither of us, like, even though we loved to do the things that we did, we were just all over the place. You know, it wasn't like we weren't that disciplined. But one night he went to go see Grandmaster Flash in the Furious 5. And he came home the next day. We were like all crashing in this apartment up on Wilton and Franklin. And he came in and he was just lit up. He was like, man, I saw these guys who were rapping. You know, it was like we were just learning about hip hop, you know, and he saw Grandma's Flash. He was like, it was incredible. You know, these stories and these narratives, and it's poetry, but it's like it's rhythm, and it's singing, but it's not. It's rapping, and it's fucking amazing, and I'm going to do it, you know. And he just sat right down and started writing this rap. And at the same time, a friend of ours, who I write about in the book, my dear friend Gary Allen, was doing a show, and he said, why don't you guys get something together and do an opening act for me? And Anthony wrote this rap, and I had this groove, this song, and we made our first Chili Pepper song called Out in L.A., and we got together and we played. And that was it.
Yeah. You end the book on right at the moment, at the birth of the Chili Peppers. Does this mean you're writing part 2?
At the time, I was absolutely convinced that I was going to do a part 2, and now I'm kind of on the fence about it. I don't know. I definitely want to write, and I have like a bunch of different things in my head, and I'm writing stuff. And whether I want to release another memoir, at least next, I don't know.
Yeah. I wanted to end with, and sadly, I think we do have to, with one of my favorite. The book begins with this incredibly powerful and evocative picture of the Hollywood of your preteen years, of the early 70s. And then it ends with this extraordinary, vivid depiction of the Hollywood sort of musical scene of your early 20s. And there's one little chapter, and I'm going to make you read again.
Okay.
Where it's when you have a part-time job with the veterinarian, and you liberate a whole series of pills.
Oh, yeah.
You'll remember this, from the vet's office.
I was going to actually try to, because when I did the pill installation, because I stole pills from the veterinary hospital I worked at, and installed them as an art piece. And I thought, you know, I beat Damien Hirst to the punch. But
yeah. So imagine, hundreds of these pills?
Hundreds for sure. Yeah, for every variety of pill.
So all along the kind of...
Yeah, there was like a mantle that went along the house that we were renting.
So you have...
Santa Monica and Formosa.
I want you to read these last 2 chapters here, that page.
The pills were... we had a party, by the way. And
if that wasn't obvious, yeah.
Yeah. And I put all these pills up. The pills were for various animal maladies like diarrhea, raw spots from excessive itching, and also included antibiotics and tranquilizers. The crowd of Hollywood high and low lives ate the pills and puked and pooped for days afterward. Emerging through the craziness of the party crowd came Snickers, a dude from a local punk band called The Stains. He commandeered the stereo, took off the arty music we were playing, and put on an AC/DC record. When I tried to put on some Ornette Coleman, he jumped up in front of the record player and whipped out a Bowie knife. A 40-ounce of Schlitz in one hand and the knife in the other, he stood guard over his AC/DC for the length of the album, stoically hanging his head, greasy hair hanging down over his wildling bloodshot eyes. I wasn't gonna fuck with him. True rocker. We later became friends. Snickers was a wild dude.
That, I think,
And the Stains were a great band.
that story, I think, in some ways sums up the wild and magical and wonderful spirit of this extraordinary book that you've written. And I would, I think I speak for everyone in this audience when I say that please write part 2. I mean, we absolutely.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking Flea.
Thank you.
Good.
We couldn't be more thrilled to have done our first live Broken Record with Flea. Make sure to go pick up his book, Acid for the Children. You can check out a playlist we put together featuring songs from some of Flea's favorite albums. It's at brokenrecordpodcast.com. You can also sign up for a behind-the-scenes newsletter while you're there. Broken Record is produced by Pushkin Industries with help from Jason Gambrell and Mia Lobel. Our theme music's by The Great Kenny Beats. Stay tuned for next week's episodes. You heard me right, we're dropping 2. I'm Justin Richmond. Thanks again for listening.